Take her away, David.
Okay.
Hello.
Yeah.
And now introducing David Walters.
Okay. First, a few things about Vulcan. I've already done one tonight, but if I have not done it in previous years and get the word around, I will be happy to look at your chart and find out the positions of Vulcan generated by all the software programs is incorrect. And Rose just told me that last year's lecture is on the web, so go watch it. That will give you. Now, I will be talking about Vulcan for some strange reason. Oh, yeah. Okay. Back in '86, when I first heard about Vulcan, when I attended an ordinary astrology conference, and Alan Oken gave 2 lectures on esoteric astrology. Oh, my. And so I got curious about Vulcan, and the public library where I have has 20 years of Alan Leo's Modern Astrology. And in the 1906 issue was beginning of a series of articles on the foundations of physical astrology, which showed how astrology worked from a mathematical and physics and an astronomical point of view. And I gave a lecture on it in 1988 or 89 here at the conference. But in the meantime, I've learned more about him and have gotten most of his works. And I've made contacts all over the world. And right after the last conference, David Harvey in England mentioned that he had unpublished Jeffrey Hodson and George Sutcliffe manuscript. It was written in 1929 after 4 years of discussion and research at the British Theosophical Society. A research group was founded. Sutcliffe had been in India from 1897 to 1925, and obviously he joined that group. Okay. He wrote 3 articles on this in the Theosophist in 1929, that's the only place it's ever been published. 1930, this book, New Astronomy and Cosmic Physiology, was written, and it's fairly rare. The manuscript was written in 1929, 84 years ago. Uranus has completed its orbit, not by accident. And David was part of a group that went through one of the offices at the Theosophical Society, and there it was. And he contacted me. Okay, about the authors. Most of you have heard of Jeffrey Hodson. He was born in England and went in 1929, and leaving the last manuscript unfinished. Went on to Australia and wound up in New Zealand. I was going to refer you to the website that Bill Kyden had built about him in New Zealand, but it's gone. And the email address I had emailed Bill about the manuscript came back. The widow is still alive, from what I understand, but is a recluse. I have the appendices about his life, and if you want them, I'll be happy to email you the file. The chart of his birth is on the next slide. Sutcliffe, textile family manager. The one that he was running in Leeds, burned down in 1897, had to move to Edger, India. Gee, what a nice place to go. Joined the Theosophical Society, wrote 70 articles and 2 series in modern astrology. The other one was about the Great War, which I think in part was a tribute to one of his sons who died in Jerusalem during the war. He also wrote an article in the Theosophist in 1909, how saying a date in 1910 would be the ideal date for Krishnamurti's first initiation.
Have you heard it, John?
It's in Philip's book. And Philip did mention it. Wrote a series of articles about studies in occult chemistry and physics. Volume 1. This is the only one in print. Oh yeah, getting back to Vulcan. He wrote 66 pages about Vulcan in 1900. I discovered this after I had written the first edition of the Vulcan book. My goodness, it was very similar. Elena, I just emailed it to you.
Thank you.
And moved back to England in 1925. No reason given. And this is his chart. Now, this is where it gets interesting. And when I did the presentation at the conference in 88 or 89, Philip Lindsay says, "You were him, weren't you?" And so we looked at the charts. Can I have the pointer?
Yes. Here it is,
Yeah,
Ah.
the last.
right there. Just press the button.
Okay. Notice I have a Sun-Mars conjunction there and a Pluto-Saturn conjunction there. Notice where his Saturn is, 2 degrees before mine. He has a Saturn or a Pluto-Mars conjunction square his Saturn. You got to remember Pluto at that point in its orbit was moving about a half a degree a year in Taurus. What else was there? Oh yeah, I was born almost exactly 3 cycles of Saturn later. And if you take a look at it from his perspective, that was his personality phase of Saturn, his soul, and about half of his spirit. So there's very little doubt that, okay, physics was totally Newtonian until the following happened. Einstein's theory of relativity in 1918. And Sutcliffe was very upset with it initially. Bohr's theory of quantum light, i.e., physicists were having problems debating whether light was a wave or a particle. Quantum theory, quote, solved that problem. And then in 1925, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, i.e., you can't measure the orbit of an atom, if you're looking at its speed, and if you measure the orbit of the atom, you can't measure the speed, you can't measure the orbit. So, oh yeah, 1925, Treatise on Cosmic Fire was published. It was about the cosmic physical plane, and this manuscript is about the solar system, and yeah, a little bit beyond it. Its premise is that energy is magnetic in its nature, which is something that we have long learned. And so, okay, Sutcliffe wrote 3 articles in 1929 in the Theosophist. Then there's New Astronomy and Cosmic Physiology, and then the manuscript. What is not there? In the manuscript, Hodgson was very clearly supposed to write the introduction. There was supposed to be an introduction to the bar magnet chapter and the description of the laboratory. And then Sutcliffe, volume 2 of Studies in Occult Chemistry and Physics appeared in the Theosophist, was never made into a book. Again, if anybody wants both volumes, let me know. I have them in one document. He states that there are 3 unpublished manuscripts about occult chemistry and physics, and actually all 5 manuscripts are the mathematical end of magnetic astronomy and astrophysics. Oh yes, dictated. We know what that means. Yeah, I'm fairly sure that it is the Tibetan, because look at the next quote. If I am right, it is a dead or dying planet, not in the same sense as the moon is, my emphasis, rather as if the evolutionary life wave and attention of the Logos was being withdrawn from it and directed to its astral counterpart, leaving many forms of life behind. And when I was talking with Sheldon James in our group, Sheldon was telling James about a little bit of Alice Bailey's history with the Tibetan, and one of the things Sheldon mentioned is that it was very 5th ray. Believe me, the material in this manuscript is very, very 5th ray. And why did Hodgson's mother die? And so he was free to leave England and go to America, to the United States, where he had been asked to come to do. Has anybody read Angelic Host?
From Hudson?
Yeah.
I've read Light in the Sanctuary, but not...
Okay. Okay, because I think that book came out of this because the first event happened in 1926, as I'll get to a little later. Sandra Hodgson, his second wife, did release a book called Clairvoyant Investigations in 1984. I have read that. It has nothing in it about the earlier days. Uranus returned later. Okay, it brings a lot more definition to how the cosmic world works, especially in our solar system. A lot of the time is spent on the sun and some on the moon. And yeah, the moon is a dead form. Remember, EA wasn't even transmitted at this point. Some time is spent on Sirius, the master sun of our portion of the universe. Two suns, other suns are mentioned, probably Alcyone and Polaris. Alpha Centauri also gets a mention. So, yeah, it's... Okay, yeah, there's a whole 4 or 5 pages on Vulcan. There's a planet at about 2 o'clock, and I'll show you what that means about the sun. I'll let you read it. It is physical, but it appears to be very dark, almost black, almost at an obscuration, and the life wave has gone on to the astral, representative of the chain. In other words, remember, Vulcan has a chain. It is the only physical planet. There's life, but it's a curious life, residual, and elemental. And an aside, I recently got an email from Rick saying that the newest satellite of Pluto has been named,
Vulcan.
well, you see my one-word response.
Yes, I thought it was disappointing.
Yeah. Okay, other planets. Horus. It's an astral planet, large, gaseous, and in the asteroid belt. Isis, about 50 Earth AU, or about 350 year orbit, about 1820 Scorpio. Osiris was 70 AU, about a 600-year orbit, and it was about 15 Leo. Remember, Pluto was in Gemini when it was found, and Nicholas, I remember, as I was doing my research, I was collecting all the data, by the astrologers and the astronomers, and it was a long list, wasn't it? So, I haven't looked at it in a long time. Okay, about the known planets. A lot is said about the sun. Venus, the planet are of harmony. The most interesting thing that he said about Uranus is that it's our secondary sun. And Michael, when you said it was the electric fire of the spirit,
You said that too. You said that.
No, he didn't say
okay.
that, but
Okay.
I just put that in at the last minute.
Home of electric fire. That's how he
Yeah.
describes it.
And so a secondary sun, yeah. And very little is said about the others, i.e. what, okay. They had a laboratory. It was in Oman, Holland. I couldn't figure out why. And then one night while I was could not get to sleep, I kept waking up, oh yeah, about many things. And one of the theosophists in the research group had a house there that they could volunteer. Sutcliffe made machines to record the data, and Hodson's did the communication with DK, and charts were cast. The charts were heliocentric, with the sun on the midheaven, the earth on the nadir. Let light descend on earth. Equal cusp houses were used so that each cusp was an hour. Most of them was pretty accurate. All right, this one was interesting. The first chart that they printed in the group, in the thing. And if you take a look, notice they have positions for Osiris, and that everything else was pretty close. Now, when I looked at it the first time, it said Mercury was in at 1 o'clock. I said, wait a minute. everything else is right. So I went back to the manuscript, and they, obviously a typed manuscript, and there were 2 spaces between the 1 and the o'clock, rather than 1. So I think it's reasonable to assume that it was a typo of a sort. There were very few of them in there. Okay, this is the chart of the first dictation. Whoops, wrong year. Okay, so that's not right. But they were the research group. It was 1926, and what they were doing was experimenting. And somebody brought a bar magnet in. Then all of a sudden, Hodgson suddenly got communications. And I think they were a little bit floored. Okay. Let me make sure that, okay, yeah. Okay. There have been a lot of people involved. I'll get to David Harvey. Lisa Eddy, when I was working at an astrology website, she lived in England and went out of her way, found out what we know about Sutcliffe and his family. He was married, had 4 children, 2 of whom's names we know, two of the sons, one of whom died, the other we don't know. Bill Kyden, the webmaster, who I think now is gone, have you heard anything?
You know, I don't think he's gone. I think I would have heard if he were.
Can you check into
I
the,
will check that when I get back, yes.
and find out why the website's
Yep, I will.
Okay, thank you very much. Because, as I said, you know, I've got the appendices with Hodson's bio. So anybody who wants it, please. Okay, Murray Steniford, do you know him? Okay. Worked with Hodson and those investigations. Murray has been in contact with me, and I sent him a copy of the manuscript recently, but I have not heard back. And David Harvey, I somehow got his name from I know who I got it from. Somebody up near Leeds where Sutcliffe was born. And there was the head of the Bradford Theosophical Society passed it on. David lives in the southwestern portion of England, and he just happened to BTS when the offices were cleaned out, and has been very helpful in many, many ways since. I sent him the introduction. I did do an introduction. I also wrote up an analysis of all the charts that the dates they gave. But he said, okay, that why Hodson didn't finish the introduction, perhaps finalize the hand-drawn diagrams, which are in the book. We don't know, but anyway, that the Theosophical Society Foundation is very pleased to see this fascinating work in the field of esoteric science should see the day. There are really some groundbreaking stuff in it. And more than anything else, now what needs to be done? A lot. David just happens to be in England. So, or in London. So this time, I asked him a bunch of questions, and this time he's really going to look because he's now seen the finished project. And find out more about Sutcliffe and his heirs through the probate court. And for example, other manuscripts, Sutcliffe hinted in Physical Foundations of Astrology that there was more, but it was not published by Alan Leo. I just found out there's a working draft. I suspect it's going to have some gems in it, and hopefully that will be in the mail to me soon. Okay, they took copious notes and data. As I mentioned, Sutcliffe had machines to do it. Where are those notes? I'd love to see them. Okay, people, most men in their positions, you know, educated and so forth, kept diaries. Yeah.
Where are the machines? Where's Sutcliffe's machine?
That's a good question. You know, these are totally unknown. Okay, Sutcliffe, okay, Hodson went on to America in 29 and basically moved westward to New Zealand. And Sutcliffe remained in London and died 4 days after Annie Besant did. He was run over by a motorcycle, and I just got the feeling when it made the London Times, that's how I knew. And I just felt, you know, obviously by that time, telegraphs were and so the people in England found out about it, and it made the newspapers. And so I'm sensing that there was a wake. And he just walked out of there just totally distraught. He, at one point, when Annie was running, wrote about a 10-page essay on why Annie should become president of the Theosophical Society. So, and that also that said Watson is very much a recluse. And I don't know what can be done about that, because I would love to get her involved and let her know what's going on. And I don't have any way. It will be a while. And Sutcliffe had suggested it be 3 volumes, 1 the manuscript, 2 New Astronomy and Cosmic Physiology, and the 3rd the mathematics. And I can see where it's more appropriate to merge the manuscript and New Astronomy. And who will publish the book? I'm gathering from what David has said to me that they're not going, the Theosophical Society is not anxious to do it. So that would leave somewhere else to do it. And I know Justin, when I talked with him last year, was interested. But I think, you know, he was thinking of doing an ebook, but I think this really can be a printed book and really deserves to be, now that I really have seen it. Okay, I have about 10, 15 copies. Some of them I know people, and they're $25. I'm just breaking even at that price. And if you get a copy of the book, feel free to comment. I want to hear from people. Because, okay, just a second. Okay, the next slide is one of the quotes that when I read for the first time just absolutely stunned me. And I'm going to close with this. I'll let you read it. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of other good passages, but this one,
Who, is this Hodson that took this down?
yeah,
It's very poetic, it's very beautiful. He's
Yeah.
speaking of the solar logos, I suppose?
yeah,
You know, Charles Jane, about
Yeah.
whom you know, and with whom I studied for 1 year before he died, and whose work I gave on to other astrologers and who Nicholas has developed and others have developed, somehow got in touch with this stream of thought and dealt with Isis and Osiris
Right, I
and some
know.
of those
yeah.
hidden planets. He has a book called, what's it called?
Unknown planets.
Unknown Planets.
Yeah.
And of course, to him, these were completely real. He felt that the ephemerides were reasonable, although they were circular, I guess, you know, they were not elliptical. And he worked with them and said these are real factors. And the Tibetan talks about more than 115 planets in our solar system, and he's not talking about asteroids. He mentions the asteroids in another breath. So apparently, this line of development went through Jane, and, you know, at least he was telling me about the Sutcliffe work and so
Right.
forth. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, okay, he was one of the few that knew about him.
yeah.
Not many knew about
And he
him.
developed it. He believed in it, and he thought it was factual.
Okay,
Factual.
the only thing I'm going to say from reading the Foundations of Physical Astrology is that the mathematics is going to have to be gone over carefully by somebody who has the knowledge of physics and astronomy.
Is that you?
No. But that can be worked on, getting somebody to do once we get the other 3 manuscripts. But, you know, I feel excited too because
Yeah.
really in here is a whole bunch of new material supplementing what's in EA. And it was written before EA, which is,
And it correlates in many respects. in
yeah,
certain
yeah,
respects.
yeah. I mean, this is why I know that the Tibetan,
Seems to have been involved.
Yeah.
He does make a comment about Vulcan that 2/5 of its humanity has achieved, whereas only 1/5 of Earth humanity have achieved, and Venus has a total achievement in that breath. So even if there's no activity going on the physical globe, there's certainly some sort of
Yeah.
man-like activity.
yeah. And I'm going to bring up something very strange. Back when I wrote the first edition of Vulcan, I wrote a chapter about the planetary chains because, and the schemes and so forth, and that, a scheme, for example, has 1 physical, 2 astral, and 2 above that on each level. And it dawned on me, in astronomy, around while a planet goes in orbit, there are 5 points in its orbit that other bodies can be without disturbing the orbit of the planet. One's right in front, the other right behind it, the third is completely on the other side, and the other 2 are about 60 degrees. And I had the thought, what about if we put the astral and other planets in those spots, but not necessarily in their orbit? And I don't have the text for that, but I scanned it, and I'm gonna look at it again. And again, if anybody wants to look at it, email me and let me know. And when I get it ready, I'll be happy to.
Well, yeah, we want to thank you, David, because you're always so generous in bringing these new findings to the group, and your enthusiasm carries, and we never know what's coming next. But the only thing we seem to know is that you show up at conference, and it's always with something new. So thank you very much for your presentation.